Hello and welcome to this special show, Rajan's Last Policy. The bond of Mint Street has just delivered his last monetary policy at the Reserve Bank, and he is stuck to the script actually, leaving all rates unchanged, as was anticipated by the markets and experts. But Rajan's legacy is much more than his last policy. The man who has quite a fan following in the country has always been known to speak his mind and walk the talk that he has charted for himself. And as he gets set to walk out of the Reserve Bank headquarters in perhaps less than a month's time, we have a power-packed panel right here on CNBC-TV18 to try and assess his eventful term at Mint Street. Joining me now is one person who has worked very closely with Dr. Rajan, the chairman of the country's largest public sector lender, the chairman of the country's largest bank, actually, State Bank of India's Arundhati Bhattacharya, another market veteran, Puri of UTI Asset Management Company is also with us, one of the biggest private equity investors in the country. Sanjay Nayar of KKR India is here, as is Nilesh S of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. The treasurer on the panel is Jayesh Mehta of Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and joining us from Bengaluru is the chairman of Manipal Global Education, and more importantly, a maverick in both electronics, in digital and in finance, Mohandas Pai. Welcome, lady and gentlemen, to the show. Well, actually, let me start with the person who always is going to be immediately impacted by the monetary policy. Okay, we will be going to Mrs. Bhattacharya in just a minute to ask her about her take on the Rajan era, but more particularly today's policy. Actually, let me go to Jayesh Mehta if he is with us. Jayesh, actually, today was not so much a monetary policy in terms of interest rates, but it was a promise of liquidity. Do you think Rajan's parting kick in terms of liquidity is a very powerful one, and that we are going to see interest rates coming down?
Latha, I think the audio is very low. I can't hear what you are saying. So,
well, I'm just asking you.
Next.
Yeah, your key takeaway from today's liquidity policy. Oh, well, I think we'll have to come to it in a minute. Jayesh's audio is just being fixed, and we will get to him. Mr. Puri, good evening to you.
Right.
What did you make of, first of all, Rajan's legacy in terms of monetary policy? He has put in a monetary policy framework, bound the country by law to a 4% inflation plus or minus, and a monetary policy committee. That's a seminal institutionalization of inflation. You think it will last?
I think it will, and I think it's a very progressive step that he's taken. There's been a lot of debate as to whether or not India needs such a regime. But I think he's presented a very cogent case. He's built consensus around it. And I think it will be one of the many significant contributions that he would have made as a governor. So,
okay, I'll come back to you to check whether things can go awry. But Sanjay, actually, your take on the same thing. You've been a career banker and now a private equity investor. Do you think the attack, or the attack on inflation or on high inflation is now written into the law solidly enough that we will not transgress 6% inflation, at least in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think so. Latha, I think he's done clearly his portion of the job, much more than what I think one would have hoped for. In any kind of a reform, he's got a role to play, and so does the government. I think he's done an ample amount of his role by by clearly giving a message that inflation targeting is critical. He's leaving enough room for growth, which is not necessarily driven just by easy rates, but he wants to see investment spending pick up. I think he said that repeatedly. I think he's trying to create capacity for credit by pushing the banks to lighten up on the NPA. So I think if you look at the banking sector reforms, I think he's played a solid more than 65–70% of his role here.
Yes, actually, that's a lot of ground that you have covered, the way in which he has expanded the number of banks and the kinds of banks for which he has given licenses, as well tried and tackled the NPA problem, first by stating it For so long, we have been pretending that it doesn't exist. Let me get Nilesh Shah's first views and then tackle these issues one by one, because Rajan has covered a lot of ground. It's the institutionalized inflation, it is changes in the banking sector, it is tackling of the NPAs, a whole host of things. But Nilesh Shah, the first question really is India respected now as a country of strong macros? Does it look like this country now will not very easily renege on inflation, on current account deficit, and on commitment to this discipline?
I think today market and investors are definitely expecting that. On the fiscal path, government is following the commitment which they had promised in last year's budget and year before that. Next year also we should be targeting fiscal deficit around 3% level. So that's building up a very strong macro. And from a market point of view, the way today rupee volatility is there, whether in terms of implied volatility in options or in terms of actual volatility in terms of behavior, it's one of the lowest we have witnessed in many years. And especially in an era where other emerging market currencies have fallen like a stone, the rock solid performance of rupee is clear testimony to RBI's credibility in managing currency.
Okay. Well, certainly, we were making some comparisons, and perhaps those graphics will run for you. From September 4th, 2013 to today, the Indian currency is actually practically stable. It was 67 on the eve of Rajan taking over, and today it stands at about 66.86. So really has managed amazing stability over the same period. I think the ruble has crashed 50%, the real probably 30%, the rupiah probably 12 or 15%. Just about every currency in the emerging markets basket of big economies has gone through a bit of a jitter, which the rupee has managed to stave off. Mr. Mohandas Pai, what's your sense about Rajan's contribution? We have discussed the macros, but from your vantage digital point, is this a big contribution to the financial sector that he has made?
Well, Latha, let me start by saying, being an outsider to the system, having worked in a very large financial system outside India and the United States, at the IMF, being the chief economic advisor, I think he had a very different viewpoint when he came to the RBI. He brought an outside-in view and brought in global best practices. He was not afraid to take decisions. He was interested in improving the system, opening up the banking system, taking away the nanny state image that RBI had in handling the banks, making the banks more responsible and much more accountable. And I think he did a lot of things to open up and set in place a proper process. We are following the WPI instead of CPI for inflation targeting, whereas inflation impacts the consumer. It is a conceptual error that was there. I think he corrected that. As for the digital world is concerned, we have met him 4 times and he's opened up India to inflows of money, because for startups, he created an environment where he made it better for them to stay in India rather than re-domicile. Many companies are re-domiciling, and the trend of re-domiciling is stopped because they intervened, opened up the foreign exchange areas, and removed some of the hassles. I think he's done a fantastic work and left his imprint. He'll be among the top 20 percentile best governors India has ever had.
I will take a vote from all of you on where you would rank him in the pantheon of recent Indian governors. But actually, I wanted to scratch that point a little more about the digital part with you, Sanjay. You also have a lot of international experience. You headed the Indian unit of Citibank for so long. Now with, payment banks, with small banks, and with the unified payment interface coming in, has he led us very nicely into a new era of digital accounting and therefore a huge area of analytics which might lend to financial inclusion of an unheard of level? Are we on the throes of some kind of a digital financial revolution, what Nilekani called the WhatsApp moment in the financial sector?
Well, I don't know how to classify this as a WhatsApp moment or not, but I think clearly what he's done, he's tried to keep in tune with, using the infrastructure India has with all kind of unique identification numbers and the kind of technology leap India is making. He's kept in tune with that. I think he's addressed the fact that there is a dire need for financial inclusion at a low operating cost, and the brick and mortar can only get you that far. I think he's leveraging the mobile technology. So I think he's enabled a lot by giving all these kind of new platforms for us to utilize. Now I think the question is for the entrepreneurs and for the telcos and for the companies and the banks to utilize the best. My worry in all these things is that, you know, there's a wave that comes and everybody is now going completely euphoric about these things. Ultimately, you know, you have to have a model that works for the people who provide the service and those who get the service. And I think we have a long way to go there. But I think he's given the enabling environment, keeping in tune with technology and India's huge fragmented, widespread market here. Now it's for the rest of the people to create the right business model, frankly.
Well, let me just get one more word on this financial expansion and then come to the economic reforms and especially the banking sector's NPA issues. To wind up the discussion on the digital path, Mr. Pai, you know, the payment bank licenses, we assume in a month or in a quarter, will lay the last mile to the Jan Dhan accounts. One assumes that we will see a lot more people paying each other, maybe even migrants sending money home to their villages through either the UPI or through the payment bank. Is this something which is going to create a major thrust of financial inclusion and perhaps even analytics-based lending?
Well, Latha, let me say that the India Stack, which was created by a bunch of volunteers led by Nandan and Sharad Sharma and others, was something that Dr. Rajan bought in very well and allowed them to penetrate the system and make it happen in the last 3 years. I think it's a very important thing because no central bank governor around the world is open to innovation on a scale that Dr. Rajan did. So allowing the India Stack to come, which has UPI, which has Aadhaar, e-KYC, digital locker and e-privacy, is a full stack, has allowed 250 million people to come into the digital era. Along with the payment banks, it means that the banking system, the payment part of the banking system is now open. Many more startups can come in on a layer of APIs. It will make transaction costs cheaper. It will bring in competition into the banking system and is open the genie up to everybody else. From a closed system is made into an open system, and I can say very confidently what Dr. Rajan has allowed to happen and the India Stack is a signal for 6 billion people on this planet for a new era of banking. The existing banking model is geared towards the 1 billion people in the OECD countries. The new model that India has in digital banking is for the 6 billion people who are probably outside, are not very, very familiar with the banking system, and it's for them. So I think we are going to lead this revolution the next 3 or 4 years without too much of legacy. Since more banks are in core banking, and if you put a layer of APIs on top of them, this digital banking becomes easy to do. So it will be extremely competitive. I think it's a fantastic thing that has happened in this country, and it will be revolutionized banking.
Yes, one hopes that this is financial inclusion par excellence. Last word on that, Mr. Puri. Is this a seminal step at all in financial inclusion that we are seeing under our eyes?
Absolutely. I think he's been an extremely modern and progressive governor in this regard who's embraced change. And this is in keeping with the best central banks in the world who've actually recognized the potential of fintech and financial technology to drive inclusion, drive efficiency, drive transparency. And so he's really given us a big push and a positive nudge in that direction.
Okay. Well, actually, I wanted all of you to grade Rajan on several subjects, if you please, like he would be perhaps doing his students in Chicago. One of them would be financial inclusion and digital banking. Where would you place him there, Mr. Puri?
You mean out of 10? Or
yeah, no, well, it's out of 10. Make it an ABC.
Oh, I'd give him an A on that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Pai, going by what you extolled, your rank on financial inclusion and digital banking would be?
A+ or AAA.
Okay.
It's state of the art in the world.
All right. Sanjay, you want to take a jab at that?
No, I can't. Not after what Mohandas said. Yeah.
Okay.
Can't beat that number.
Nilesh, what about you?
I am not qualified to give on that answer.
Okay, fine. Those who have graded have given him an A+, so I'll leave it at that. And let me go to the banking NPA problem, because that's a huge problem. We can come to the economy in a bit and ask you all to grade on that. But on the NPA issue, let me start with you, Sanjay, since you have been handholding some of the banks or even participating with some of the banks to perhaps write down debt, buy the remaining part of the debt, restructure the company. Is even recognition of NPA something which not all central bankers have had the courage to do? Was that itself a great thing? And then the way he went about it, your comments and your ranking.
I think that's one of the biggest legacies he leaves behind, although there's a lot of work to be done. So frankly, the results are yet to be seen. But in terms of recognizing the problem, forcing the banks to recognize the problem, offering them a stick and carrot through different mechanisms to try to recognize the problem and to get on with the solution. I think to address the flawed structure of the ARCs and making that a little bit more real, you know, recognizing the fact that that is not the panacea for all the problems. And I would say then being accommodative after that in addressing some of the infrastructure delayed projects for various historical reasons through various mechanisms. And all of this under an umbrella, I think, of very, very precise AQR mechanism that has been going on nowadays. So look, I think one can say there is clearly a recognition of the problem. It's absolutely on everybody's radar. That's a different issue, that assets haven't moved as yet at a fair clearing price, and I think it will happen in the future. But in terms of what I just said, don't want to repeat myself, I think he's done a lot in that direction in the 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do think that even recognizing and getting the political authorities to, you know, handhold him to recognize the problem was very creditable. Your take, Nilesh, on this? You have to claim the expertise.
No, I completely agree with Sanjay. Clearly for NPA, the biggest issue is timely recognition. And if you could recognize NPAs timely, probably the burden of NPA wouldn't be so high. So clearly RBI in last few years have done remarkable job in terms of recognizing NPAs, in terms of creating mechanism for resolving it, and then working within the environment to bring that issue onto the top priority. In terms of results, probably one will be a little bit disappointed, because still there might be, you know, the asset sale which should have happened is not happening, but then that's part of the environmental problem rather than the domain of RBI. So I will give the AAA marks to RBI in terms of cleaning up the system.
Okay, I was just going to say it's a term paper that he has probably just half written. So will you be willing to mark? You have already marked him. Sanjay, you won't give marks?
No, I don't think we need to give marks. I think for
grades.
the task on hand, he's done a lot. Yeah.
Oh, right. You want to grade it, Mr. Puri? The effort on NPAs?
No, I mean, I think, you know, just to the way I look at it, Latha, is that in one sense what Dr. Rajan did was to pursue the conventional RBI agenda in the tradition of Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Reddy, and so on. And while people think of him as a radical, in many ways he was working with the grain at the RBI. And the NPA issue is one which the RBI has worked on consistently for a number of years, as indeed is a monetary policy framework, and as indeed is an approach to currency management and the approach to financial inclusion. And so what you have in Dr. Rajan is somebody who, on the one hand, has been an evolutionary leader of the RBI in the best tradition, working with the grain in the institution. But he's also been a very spirited public servant, where he's more in the tradition, I would say, of people like a Seshan or a Rai, Vinod Rai, in terms of the lasting contribution he's going to make. So if you were to ask me about the approach to NPAs and so on, what differentiates it for me is not so much just continuing to impress upon the financial system the importance of this, you know, decade-old problem, but the spirit, vigor, transparency, energy, and the very public communication around the aims and objectives of what he was trying to achieve, and frankly, the ability to build a consensus with the Ministry of Finance. Because at the end of the day, while people often comment, and they commented in Subbarao's time as well, about the differences between MOF and RBI and so on, actually the singular feature of this whole process on his approach to NPAs is how much consensus there has been within the political system at the end of the day, at least the more progressive part of the political system, and the governor. He could not have achieved what he has achieved in terms of really redefining the level of urgency, creating solutions. You know, it's too early to say whether this is irreversible, unfortunately. Yes. So when you ask for grades and marks, unfortunately our system has a way of frustrating, you know, the noblest enterprises. So I don't think we can declare victory. But he has laid a platform which I hope we will not waste for dealing much more convincingly and with much more, I hope, a sense of closure on this issue, which has plagued us through cycles over 2 decades. So it's a singular contribution, and it's been built through consensus and a spirit of public service, which I think has been unrivaled in recent times.
I think you've put it very well. And even the pantheon of people you have referred to, both the Reddy Rangarajan tradition as well as the Sheshan Vinod Rai tradition of, calling a spade to some extent, both those converging in this. Well, let's do one thing. Let's take a break. We have to come back and discuss what is really grain of a central bank's policy, the inflation control, as well as the way in which he has buttressed it with liquidity. All those questions to our experts in a minute. We are back in a jiffy.